So in our last episode, we talked about the importance of doing work that is impactful, and how important that is for me. And really, what attracted me to Lorna was her feeling of the same thing. Is that we weren't keen on the same old stuff that has been done, and we were looking at new things to do that would actually impact. And so, the whole issue of Africa, which is so important to both of us, is definitely where we are looking at taking the conversation. And the PR sort of industry in Africa has really, really evolved.
Oh, yes.
And Lorna, you and I have sort of talked about that. We've actually written stuff about that. And maybe you can just expound on where you think PR is going on the continent.
So look, there was that article famously that ran in Economist a couple of years ago about Africa being this deathbed, which was then followed up by the next one of Africa Rising. And part of the conversation for me around Africa Rising is it was framed from the context of infrastructure and outsiders doing stuff on the continent. So whether it's minerals exploration, the whole bust around energy, oil, is the reason, and that bust really giving the economy a boost. But going back to the fact that we care about impact, it is, what about the Africans? What about us? How are we rising? How is this changing? And there's a lot of statistics of, oh gosh, we've got unemployment. Yes, we are the youngest continent. Yes, unemployment is the biggest thing, agriculture. But in the midst of all that are people doing specifically amazing things, whether it's technology to be able to bridge some of those gaps. We don't always celebrate the fact that we have one of the most educated populations, especially here in Kenya, across Africa. We've got some of the most educated people. What are the opportunities that those people see? When you talk to millennials, some of those people, they don't have this hopeless view of the continent. They're like excited, dynamic, doing things, creating opportunities, whether it's fashion, music, tech. This is the environment within which they're thriving. And I think it's important we tell those stories and we manage those conversations and we create a platform for them. Now, things like social media allow organic growth out of that. So whether it's a fashion designer from Ghana or somewhere else, they're going to put up their stuff and it's going to be a wow thing. But that tends to be proliferated, so it's everywhere. How do you create a space where you start talking about this? And how do you involve organizations, businesses into that space? Because a lot of time they tend to have the clout.
Yeah, sure.
And they are able to then take it to the next level. And so for me, also being part of a network of African young leaders through the Tutu Fellowship Program, of which I've been a member now for 8 years, you also keep seeing from the new people who come on board or who join the fellowship program every year that their vision is different. We've got storytellers, we've got content creators.
Absolutely, and they're confident
about it. I mean, you and I were just talking about the fact that the movie that you were helping produce. It's been nominated for an Oscar. These are African stories. I mean, and it's not necessarily it's not a story shot in Africa. It's really about Africa.
It is about an African person.
How do we leverage around these things? How do we turn those into conversations? I always say this: America's biggest PR platform is Hollywood. Everyone knows the land of the free and the home of the brave,
and they've branded it.
They've branded it. This space has managed to push that. So it's easy for everyone to think that that's a land of milk and honey and we'll succeed whenever we go there. That's all we get to hear. How do we do that for the continent? How do we allow big industries, big players to be able to say it? How do we get the major organizations who get heard and who become opinion shapers and perception shapers about a space, do that and do that well? How do we get our governments on board? How do we get our private sector
and also reputation is becoming a lot more important.
Absolutely.
So I think that's the other kind of opportunity on the African space, is that reputation is becoming so important that governments and a lot of African companies don't know how to manage their reputation. So for me, that's a big plus. But I think the other thing is that we're seeing the footprint of the international PR communications companies coming into Africa increasing.
Yes.
And I think I said something to you yesterday, which is what somebody who mentors me said to me once. And he said, you know what, you can either be a travel agent,
Or you can be a
tour guide.
Yes.
And the travel agent was, you're just somebody that's sending someone to a destination. And I think a lot of the international companies are that. They're based out of New York or London, and they're travel agents. So they're sort of telling their clients, all this stuff about Africa, but they actually haven't been there.
Yes.
And or you can be a tour guide, which is where I consider us,
yes,
where you're actually going with them
on the
and
journey.
You've been there before, and you're taking them with you. And I see. So I think for me that's the exciting thing, is that we've experienced Africa. We know Africa, and we are an ideal partner for either African companies or international companies coming onto the continent,
yes,
because we know the space.
Yes.
And so I think for me that's a great opportunity, in the partnership that you and I have, is that we're not looking at just Kenya.
No.
No. And I've been looking at Africa now for quite a while. I've done lots of work on the continent, and I know you have too. And I think that's, for me, is where it's really exciting, is that the space around communications on the continent is just so exciting, and it's so vibrant, and it really requires people that are tour guides.
And tour guides positively.
And exactly, tour guides positively,
yes,
that have been there before.
Yes.
And that will be saying to the people that want to go, like, come on, let's go, and let's walk this journey with you.
And I like that you talked about reputation, because even how international businesses engage in Africa has changed. We can no longer get away with TIA,
No.
This is Africa. Over the last let's say, year and a half, we've seen a lot of scandals of really reputable firms globally.
Absolutely.
Struggling on the continent to figure out how to make these things work. And part of that has been shaped by that whole narrative that this is the only way to do business. And that's
or you can get away with doing anything you want.
Exactly.
And I think that's the thing, is that, globally that's not acceptable anymore.
No.
And so for me, that's very much about, how do we lift this industry to now manage that?
Yes.
And that's really where I see, so what you and I are doing together is that we're going to take the industry on the continent to where they can manage it.
And also the fact that we have a lot of local talent across.
Absolutely.
And sometimes there's a perception that you need to bring in, your own expertise. You need to kind of bring in other people. And even just allowing people to understand how to navigate that. How do you start understanding the nuances of different places? You come up with an African strategy and you're like, I'm sorry, we can't implement
Africa's not a
African strategy. We can have to look at individual countries. We'd have to be able to tell you learnings from these countries, because as much as Africa as a continent is growing and changing, individual countries bring with them individual challenges. And as you said, as a tour guide, you're then able to then say, this is unique to this place, and this will not necessarily translate into this space. And it's sometimes a very difficult conversation to have. I have had clients who've been like, oh, this is a total strategy, and I'm thinking, yeah, this is a strategy for one country. You can pick elements of your messaging and we can package it for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different, culturally.
But yes, culturally, this is not going to fly, or this is not your audience. And I think you bring the lens of knowing traditionally this is what they want, and then there's a bit of disruption happening, and I'm saying, well, this is also the disruption. Have you thought about this?
Yes.
And that for me is the most exciting thing about some of the conversations we've had.
Yeah,
some of the projects we're working on right now that are across the continent, and where they're saying, guys, this is not what happens across everywhere else, and I'm really excited about that.
And I think, for us as a business, it's so exciting, just what we have in front of us in the next few months. I mean, there's some really big projects, some really exciting stuff going on, and I really can't think of a better person to be doing it with than Lorna. And so
thank you.
I'm excited for this journey. I'm excited really for Lorna to be sharing some of her own experiences on this channel in the next few weeks. So.
Well, thank you, and it's such an honor to be finally with you. And
I'm glad you're here.
This is it. This is a partnership that's going to shake things up. That's what I'm looking forward to. So thank you very much, Gina.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.